Welcome to Twilight Fables, where we tell stories for you to sleep, if you dare. Tonight, we revisit a tale you thought you knew, a sweet rhyme about breadcrumbs and clever children outwitting a wicked witch, but nursery rhymes lie. This is no story of candy houses and happy endings. This is a story of hunger, of isolation, and of a darkness older than the woods themselves. The wind combed through brittle trees, whispering secrets in a tongue older than the village. The forest had been shrinking for years, so the elders said. Trees didn't fall, but rather they simply vanished, eaten up by something deeper in the woods. Most dismissed the tales, blaming superstition, but the villagers had grown cautious all the same, especially the poor, especially those with mouths to feed. At the edge of that trembling forest stood a crooked cottage leaning against a weather-stained birch. Inside lived a woodcutter named Ulrich, his second wife Martha, and his two children, Hansel and Gretel. Ulrich had aged beyond his years, his knotted hands rough from a life of splintered work and failed harvests. Martha, once a baker's daughter from a richer village, had grown gaunt and sharp since marrying Ulrich, her temper carving lines into her face. And Hansel and Gretel, no older than 12 and 10, bore the silences of the household like heavy cloaks. Food was a whisper in their bellies most days. Ulrich's work barely brought back enough to buy bone broth scraps. What little they had, Martha rationed with cruel precision. She never struck them, but her tongue cut deeper than a switch. She called them mouths. Never children, just mouths. That winter came early. The first snow fell on a still green canopy, confusing the trees. The forest turned grey, and the sun was too weak to melt the frost clinging to the woodcutter's boots. With each passing day, the pantry echoed louder. Then came the night Martha whispered her plan. Hansel wasn't asleep. He often stayed up after Gretel's breath slowed into sleep, counting the patterns in the ceiling that resembled branches. The walls whispered in the cold, but that night it was Martha's voice that broke the silence. "There is no more," she hissed in the next room. "Tomorrow we take them deeper, farther than before, and we don't bring them back." Ulrich's reply was a murmur, but Hansel heard his father's breath catch. "They're just children," Ulrich said, voice brittle. "Their hunger, Ulrich," Martha spat. "We can't eat guilt." Hansel's heart beat like a trapped rabbit's. He did not move, not until Martha's voice dulled with sleep and the hearth turned to embers. Then, silent as a shadow, he slid out from under his threadbare blanket and padded to the door. Outside, the moon was a splinter behind cloud gauze. Hansel crouched low and slipped into the edge of the forest. He knelt beneath the dead tree with a hollow knot at its base, their hiding spot when Martha raged. He gathered the smoothest stones he could find, pale against the dark soil, and tucked them into the folds of his tunic. When he returned to bed, Gretel stirred. "What are you doing?" she mumbled. "Shh," he whispered. "Don't worry, I'll tell you in the morning." Dawn came, thin and grey. Alric's voice, too bright, called them to walk with him, and Marta to gather firewood. The children obeyed without question. Marta had a red scarf wound tight around her head, and she smiled more than usual. That alone chilled Hansel. They walked deeper than they ever had before. The trees leaned in, their limbs brittle and crooked. Strange bird calls echoed, short, clipped whistles that seemed to mimic footsteps. The path twisted until Hansel no longer recognized it. Still, he kept his hand in his pocket, dropping smooth white stones one at a time behind him. When they reached a clearing, Marta ordered them to gather branches. "Stay close," she warned, "or the shadows will take you." She and Alric turned back, claiming they needed to fetch a forgotten hatchet. The children waited until the forest hushed completely. "They're not coming back, are they?" Gretel asked, voice trembling. "No," Hansel said, "but I left a trail." They followed the stones as the sky dulled to dusk, but the trail ended sooner than it should have. The final stone lay beneath a twisted tree, its branches blackened as if burned. Beyond it, nothing, no more white glints in the dead leaves, just shadow. Hansel looked around, heart sinking. This isn't where we came from." Gretel pointed to the tree's trunk. There, carved into the bark, was a spiral, thin and deep, as if someone had clawed it in with bone. "We didn't pass this," she whispered. Hansel turned. The trees behind them looked different, taller, closer. They walked in circles until the moon rose. Then they saw the light, a faint glow pulse beyond the trees, pale yellow, soft as candlelight. It flickered, then grew brighter. "Someone's home," Gretel said, hope blooming in her chest. Hansel grabbed her hand. "Let's go together." They stepped through brambles and dark pine until the clearing opened like a wound. There it stood, not a gingerbread house, not sweet and laughing like the stories, but a tall, crooked house with walls like aged honeycomb. The windows flickered with warm light, the door creaked in the wind, the roof was shingled with scales that shimmered gold. It smelled faintly of burnt sugar and something else, meat. Inside, the house was warm. A table stood in the centre, set for two, plates filled with steaming food, roast bird, candied root, warm bread. A pitcher of milk glistened with condensation. No one appeared to be home. Gretel stepped toward the table, nose twitching. "It's a trap," Hansel said, gripping her sleeve, but his own stomach growled so loudly it echoed. A door creaked upstairs, footsteps, slow, deliberate. Down the staircase came a woman, tall, slender, her skin pale as flour, her eyes deep violet, hair like coal. She wore a dress stitched from bark and smoke. She smiled, but her mouth didn't. "Children," she said softly, "you must be so tired." Neither spoke. I've made supper. Come, eat. There's no need to fear. Not yet. Hansel's legs locked in place. Who are you? He asked. The woman tilted her head. A friend, for now. Gretel whispered, Why is your roof made of scales? The woman smiled again, wider, because I shed what I outgrow. Hansel turned toward the door, but it had vanished. Only a wall remained. The woman gestured to the table. Eat. You'll need strength for the woods. The door was gone. Hansel stood frozen, staring at the wooden wall where the entryway had once been. Just seconds ago, it had been a battered old door with iron hinges and a crooked handle. Nothing remarkable, but undeniably real. Now it was smooth timber, knotted and pale, like the trunk of a long dead tree. His breath fogged in the still air, and beside him, Gretel clutched the hem of his tunic, her small fingers trembling. The woman, if she was a woman, smiled at them with lips that were too dark and too smooth. Her violet eyes shimmered like oil in a lantern's flame. Please, she said, her voice soft but firm. Sit. You've been wondering, haven't you? Lost children deserve kindness. Her tone was syrupy, but the room felt colder with each word. Hansel looked at Gretel. Her eyes were glassy, already drifting toward the table, set with food too rich to exist in the woods. He tugged her back, gently but urgently. We're not hungry, he said. A pause, then a laugh, not cruel, but hollow, as if the woman had forgotten how laughter was supposed to sound, and only mimicked the shape of it. Oh, you are, she said. Hunger isn't just in the belly, it's in the bones. She walked slowly around the table, the hem of her dress trailing behind her like black smoke. She did not blink. Gretel's voice came small, barely above a whisper. What is this place? The woman looked at her and answered as if the question had 1,000 answers. It's a home for those who lose theirs. Hansel stepped back toward the wall, pressing his hand against the wood where the door had vanished. It was solid, real, but it gave under his palm like skin. He snatched his hand away. I want to go home, Gretel said suddenly, her voice cracking. The woman's head tilted. Do you? Gretel hesitated. Hansel saw it, the uncertainty flicker in his sister's eyes, because what was home? The silence, the starvation, the too tight room where Martha counted scraps like coins. Your old home left you, the woman said gently. This one will never do that. She gestured toward the table again. The food hadn't cooled. The steam curled upward as if time refused to touch it. Hansel's stomach twisted, torn between nausea and need. The bread looked crusty and soft inside, the kind they hadn't tasted since their mother died. Not Martha, their real mother. He turned to the woman. What do you want in return? He asked. That strange smile widened. Such a clever boy. You'd make a fine guest. Guest? Gretel echoed. Guests are welcome here, she replied, folding her hands. But guests stay until they change. Hansel moved in front of Gretel. shielding her. "Change into what?" he asked. The woman didn't answer with words. Instead, she raised one long finger and pointed to the wall behind the table. The wallpaper peeled slightly at the corners. Hansel hadn't noticed it before. As he stepped closer, he saw the pattern, hundreds of small shapes. No, not shapes, eyes. Dozens and dozens of eyes. Human, animal, in between, all drawn or stitched or pressed into the wall, each slightly different. And as he stared, some of them blinked. He turned away, bile rising in his throat. "We need to leave," he said. The woman sighed. "That's disappointing," she murmured. "But not surprising. Most try to run, at first." She raised both hands. The floor trembled beneath their feet. From the corners of the room, shadows thickened. No longer tricks of firelight, but tangible things, crawling like oil, pulling toward the children. Hansel grabbed Gretel's wrist and yanked her toward the stairs. There was no exit on the main floor, but maybe, just maybe, there was a window upstairs. The stairs groaned under their weight as they sprinted upward, the wood soft and sticky beneath their boots. The second floor was colder, so cold their breath hung in the air like fog. There were 3 doors. The first they opened revealed nothing but black feathers, thousands of them, falling endlessly from a ceiling they couldn't see. They slammed it shut. The second door opened to a room filled with puppets, child-sized, propped up on wires. Some had missing eyes. Some had mouths sewn shut. One had hair the exact shade of Gretel's. She screamed. Hansel pulled her to the third door. It was locked. Behind them, the stairs creaked. The woman was coming. He raised his foot and kicked hard at the door's handle. Once, twice, then it splintered, the door swinging inward. The room inside was dark, but there, at the far end, was a window, high and narrow, but a window nonetheless. He pulled Gretel inside and shut the door behind them, jamming a wooden chair beneath the handle. "We can climb out," he panted. "It's not far." Gretel was shaking. She didn't speak, just nodded. Hansel reached the window and fumbled with the latch. It was rusted, old, and groaned in protest. Then a snap. The chair beneath the door broke. The knob turned. He threw the window open. "Go!" he shouted. Gretel scrambled onto the sill and began to climb out, her small frame sliding easily through the gap. Hansel followed, but as he twisted to exit, fingers wrapped around his ankle, cold, strong. He screamed and kicked, twisting until his boots slipped off. He fell the rest of the way, landing hard on the moss below. Gretel helped him up. They didn't look back. They ran, through underbrush, through brambles, through fog. The trees closed behind them, groaning as they bent. The house didn't follow, but the forest had changed. The trees were no longer familiar, and now they had no trail, no stones, nothing to guide them home. They ran until their legs gave out. By the time they stopped, The forest had swallowed the sky. No stars, no moon, only the breath of trees, cold and quiet, pressing against their ears like wind through a grave. Hansel leaned against a crooked birch, panting, his shirt damp with sweat. Gretel sat on a patch of moss, her knees to her chest. I think we lost her, Hansel whispered, but the silence that answered didn't comfort him. It was the kind of quiet that listened, the kind that watched. Gretel nodded slowly. But we're still lost. She didn't cry. She never cried. Hansel wished she would. It would make her seem more like the little sister he remembered. But her face was too still, her eyes too old. I don't think we ran back the way we came, he said. Everything's different, like the forest moved, she finished. Hansel didn't respond, because that was exactly what it felt like. They had left the house, but it hadn't let them go. Gretel stood up, brushing pine needles from her dress. We have to find somewhere to sleep. Hansel looked around. No caves, no clearings, only black trunks and twisted roots. Then he spotted it, a hollow in the base of a massive oak tree, wide enough for 2 small children to curl inside. It looked like a wound in the bark, like the tree had been split open and healed around its pain. This way, he said. They crawled in together, pulling leaves across the entrance to shield them from view. Inside, it was damp and earthy, but warmer than the open air. Hansel lay on his back, Gretel beside him, and tried not to think of the woman, with eyes like candles and hands like iron. Eventually, exhaustion pulled them under, but sleep didn't bring peace. Hansel's dreams were heavy with the taste of sugar and ash. He saw a gingerbread house rising from the earth like a tumour. He saw the table of food again, only this time each dish bled when cut. The roast oozed dark wine. The bread screamed. The pies blinked open with human eyes. He turned, and Gretel was gone. In her place stood a puppet, her skin stitched from sackcloth, her smile drawn on in ink. He woke with a gasp. Dawn hadn't come. Not really. The light filtering into the hollow was a pale grey-green, like the glow beneath water. Gretel was already sitting up, her face tight. You heard it too? She asked. Hansel frowned. Heard what? She pointed toward the trees. Hansel listened, and then he heard it. A faint scratching, not like an animal, more deliberate, like claws on wood. Let's move, he said. They crawled out and began walking, sticking close together. The forest around them was dense, gnarled branches forming low arches above their heads. Every so often, they'd see a shape between the trees, a fleeting blur of something watching, but nothing stepped forward. Then they came to a stream. It flowed slow and black, deeper than it looked. Stones broke its surface like pale teeth. I think we follow it, Hansel said. Water leads somewhere. They walked along its bank for what felt like hours, until the forest began to shift again. Trees grew wider, moss thicker, and the light changed. It didn't come from the sky. It came from beneath them. The moss glowed faintly, casting their shadows upward, making it seem like they were walking upside down. Gretel reached down and touched it. "It's warm," she whispered. The air smelled sweet, too sweet, like rot hidden under honey. Then they heard it, singing, a soft lullaby in a language neither of them knew. It sounded like it came from inside the trees themselves. The siblings looked at each other, then followed it. It led them to a clearing, a perfect circle of white mushrooms. In the centre stood a figure, a child, no older than Gretel, a boy with shaggy dark hair and hollow eyes. His skin was the colour of candle wax. His mouth hung open, but the sound wasn't coming from there. It was coming from somewhere deeper. He was singing with his whole body. Hansel stepped forward. "Hello!" The boy stopped. The forest fell silent. Then the boy turned and ran. "Wait!" Gretel cried. Hansel grabbed her arm. No, it could be, but she was already chasing after him. Hansel had no choice but to follow. They ran through low branches and under hanging moss. The forest narrowed until they were practically crawling, until suddenly they burst through into another clearing. This one was different. The trees here had no leaves. Their branches were filled with cages, dozens of them, all swinging slightly as if rocked by wind. Inside, each one was a puppet. No, not puppets. Children, stuffed with straw, sewn at the limbs. Hansel stepped closer and saw one with eyes just like his. Gretel stood frozen beside him, her lips moving silently, counting. "There are 27, she whispered, "and one of them is still breathing." Hansel spun around. "What?" She pointed. A small cage near the centre swayed gently. Inside, something moved. They rushed over. It was a girl, thin as a whisper, with tangled red hair and a tear-streaked face. Her eyes fluttered open as they approached. You're not her," she said. Hansel knelt beside the cage. "Who did this to you?" "The witch," she whispered. "But she's not alone anymore. She has him now." "Who?" But the girl only closed her eyes. Then a voice answered from behind them. "I was hoping you'd come back." They turned and saw him, not the woman from before, a man, or what had once been a man. He wore a coat stitched from bark and bone. His hands twisted like roots. His mouth had no lips, just a carved slit, like a wooden mask. "You're special," he said. "She smelled it on you. The girl especially." He pointed at Gretel. "She can see what's hidden. That's rare." Hansel stepped in front of her. "You won't take her?" The man smiled, and the forest around them groaned. The cages began to shake. The trees bent inward. Hansel reached for a rock, but the ground beneath him pulsed. Alive! Fingers erupted from the moss, grabbing his ankles. Gretel screamed, and then something snapped. Not in the forest, in her. She turned toward the man and screamed, but it wasn't fear, it was fury. The The forest recoiled. The moss turned grey beneath her feet. The cages stopped swinging. The man took a step back. "You're not what she thought," he said, almost amused. "You're something older." Hansel broke free and grabbed Gretel's hand. They ran, but this time the forest didn't chase. It watched and whispered, not with claws, not with twisted limbs. It didn't need to. Hansel and Gretel didn't slow down, even as the trees thinned and the light, if it could be called that, grew dimmer and stranger. There was no sense of morning, only a faint silver haze that lit the underbrush like a fever dream. They didn't speak, not for a long time. Finally, Hansel collapsed near a fallen log, clutching his ribs. We need to rest." Gretel crouched beside him, watching the trees with narrowed eyes. Her lips were dry, chapped. Her nails were dirt-caked. "How did you do that?" he whispered. She shook her head. "I don't know." But that wasn't true. Hansel could tell. She knew something about herself, about what had happened in the clearing. The way the forest had recoiled, the way the man had stared at her like she was made of knives. Gretel stared at her hands. "When he touched you, I saw him, not his face, but what he is, underneath. And," she hesitated, "he wasn't always a monster. The forest made him one." Hansel was quiet. The wind stirred the branches. "What do we do now?" he asked. Gretel stood and pointed into the distance. "We follow the hollow path." Hansel squinted. "The what?" But she was already walking. Reluctantly, he followed. The path wasn't obvious, not to him, but Gretel seemed drawn to it, as if the trees whispered directions only she could hear. They moved through dead ferns and over slick stones until the forest floor began to slope downward. The air thickened, as if they were descending into a place long hidden from the sun. Eventually, they reached a trench. It was wide and deep, lined with roots that clawed the walls like veins. The bottom disappeared into blackness. "This is where the others went," Gretel whispered. Hansel looked at her. "Others?" She nodded. "The children in the cages. Some, they weren't taken. They walked in willingly." Hansel shivered. "Why?" "I think the forest promised them something, or someone." A gust of wind rose from the trench, carrying a smell of cinnamon and decay. "We're not going down there, are we?" he asked. But Gretel didn't answer. She climbed. Hansel cursed under his breath and followed. The descent was slow, dangerous. Roots cracked beneath their feet. Earth crumbled into the abyss. At one point, Hansel lost his grip and slid several feet before Gretel caught his wrist. Finally, they reached the bottom. It wasn't soil they stood on, but something softer, sinewy, almost like skin stretched over stone. The walls pulsed faintly. Hansel fought the urge to gag. They followed a narrow corridor, deeper into the earth. No light guided them, only the glow of the moss on Gretel's fingertips, which shimmered faintly like stardust. The tunnel branched. Gretel paused. "Left," she whispered. "How do you know?" "I just do." As they turned, Hansel noticed something on the wall. Scratches, dozens of them. Names, dates, symbols he didn't recognize. He brushed one with his fingers and flinched. The wall was warm, alive. "Keep moving," Gretel said. The tunnel opened into a chamber. It was massive, circular, and lined with mirrors, old ones, cracked and clouded with age. Some were missing shards. Others were covered in what looked like frost or dust, though no breath stirred it. In the centre stood a pedestal. Upon it sat a small, cracked porcelain doll. Its head was tilted. Its eyes were black beads. Hansel stepped toward it, transfixed. The doll opened its mouth. A voice spilled out, not childlike, deep, wrong. "She's almost ready," it said. Gretel grabbed Hansel's arm and yanked him back. The mirrors began to ripple like water. Figures appeared in them. Children, dozens. Their faces twisted in grief. Their hands pressed to the glass. "Help us," they mouthed. Hansel reached out instinctively, and the one of the mirrors shattered. A long arm burst from the broken glass, skeletal and dripping with ink-black tar. It grabbed at him. Gretel screamed and shoved him aside. The arm missed and recoiled, snapping back into the shard. The doll's mouth moved again. "She is the flame. She is the door." Hansel crushed it beneath his foot. The room fell silent. The mirrors stopped rippling, but the damage had been done. Far down the corridor, something stirred. A rumble, a growl, and footsteps. Too many footsteps. "Run," Gretel whispered. They sprinted back through the tunnel, Hansel half dragging Gretel when she stumbled. Behind them, the corridor filled with movement, shadows on all fours, crawling, giggling, teeth clacked against stone. The trench was too far. Then an opening, a side passage. They dove inside just as something howled behind them. The passage was narrow and wet. It twisted like a vein, climbing, climbing, until it spat them out into another chamber. This one was small, intimate. It looked like a nursery. There was a crib, a rocking chair, a mobile of little wooden animals hanging from the ceiling. Wolves, birds, deer, all carved with too much detail, some missing eyes. On the walls, drawings, childlike, scrawled in charcoal. A woman with no face, a forest with mouths, a girl with black fire in her hands. Gretel stepped toward the crib. It was empty, but warm, and beneath the blanket there was something, a book, bound in pale leather, stitched with gold thread. She picked it up. It opened on its own. The pages were blank. Then words appeared. "The witch is dead. The forest lives, but what lives in you is older still." The page turned. "The bargain is broken. You owe the forest nothing, but it owes you." Hansel looked over her shoulder. Then something clicked. The mobile above them began to spin. The rocking chair creaked, and a voice, softer this time, childlike, spoke from behind them. She left me here. They turned. A girl stood at the doorway. Not Gretel, but close. Same eyes, same face, only wrong, too symmetrical, too still, like a reflection. She said you'd come, the girl said. She said I could have your name. Gretel stepped back. The girl smiled, and her eyes blinked sideways, like a lizard. The girl at the door blinked again. The sideways flicker of her eyes, unsettling in the dim nursery light. Hansel gripped Gretel's hand, his heart pounding. The room felt impossibly small now, the air thick and suffocating. Your name, the girl whispered, stepping forward. Her movements were smooth, almost mechanical, like a doll wound too tight. I am waiting. Gretel swallowed hard, shaking her head. We don't know you. You're not her. The girl's smile deepened, revealing teeth sharper than any child's should be. I'm what's left. What's left? Hansel asked, voice shaking. The forest bargain, the girl said, voice lilting like a song in an empty room. When the witch was killed, the pact broke, but not everything returned to dust. Something remained. Gretel backed away, clutching the book in her hands like a shield. What do you want from us? To live, the girl said simply. To be whole. Hansel's eyes darted to the book. Can this help us? The girl tilted her head. It can, but only if you give me your names, your true names. What does that mean? Gretel demanded, voice rising. The girl's smile faded, replaced by something cold and cruel. Your names are not what you think. They are the strings that bind you to this place. Give them to me, and I will set you free. Hansel and Gretel exchanged a glance, uncertainty clouding their faces. We don't have to, Hansel said. Oh, but you do, the girl said, stepping closer. The forest watches, the forest remembers, and it does not forgive. Suddenly, the mirrors lining the nursery flickered to life again, revealing countless reflections, distorted and blurred, but all watching. The girl reached out a hand, and the shadows inside the mirrors twisted, forming hands that reached toward Hansel and Gretel. Give me your names, the girl repeated, voice now a harsh whisper. Hansel's breath caught. His mind raced, searching for a way out. We'll never give you our names, Gretel said, standing firm. The girl's eyes narrowed. Then you will remain here forever, lost to the forest. Before Hansel or Gretel could react, the nursery walls began to pulse, the air thickening with the scent of damp earth and rot. The mirrors shattered one by one, shards falling to the floor like raindrops. The girl laughed, a cold, empty sound that echoed through the chamber. We'll find another way, Gretel said, clutching the book tighter. Hansel nodded, determination settling in his chest. We don't need your name, he said. We have each other. The girl's laughter faded, replaced by a silence so deep it pressed against their skin. Suddenly, a faint glow emanated from the book in Gretel's hands. pages flipped rapidly, words appearing in a language neither could read. A doorway formed in the far wall, glowing with the same pale light. "Go!" Gretel urged Hansel. They sprinted toward the door, the girl's voice calling after them. "You cannot escape the forest. It is part of you now." Hansel glanced back once, seeing the girl dissolve into shadows. They leapt through the doorway, just as the nursery began to collapse behind them. They tumbled onto soft moss in a dimly lit glade, the oppressive weight of the forest lifting. Hansel and Gretel lay side by side, panting. "We made it," Hansel said. Gretel nodded, eyes fixed on the ancient book. "This isn't over," she whispered. "Word count 2105. Ready for part 6? You said yes. ChatGPT said, "Here's part 6 of Hansel and Gretel, continuing the dark horror tale with at least 2000 words. Hansel and Gretel, Dark Origins, a Twilight Fables horror retelling. Part 6, The Forest's Echo." The glade was quiet, but the silence was thick, almost unnatural, like the breath held before a storm. Hansel pushed himself up, still clutching the ancient book Gretel had pulled from the nursery. "We can't stop now," he said, voice low and urgent. "If that girl was a piece of the witch, we have to finish this." Gretel nodded, eyes scanning the shadows beyond the clearing, where dark trees loomed like silent sentinels. The air smelled faintly of smoke and damp earth, the forest's breath, always watching. Opening the book, Gretel traced the glowing letters that pulsed softly under her fingers. "This book," she said, "it's a grimoire. I think it contains the spells the witch used, maybe even how to break the curse." Hansel glanced up, wary. "But it called us by name. That means it knows us. And if the forest is part of us now, what does that mean?" Gretel's eyes darkened. "I don't know, but I feel it too, like something inside me shifted, like the forest is whispering in my blood." A rustle from the trees made them both freeze. Shapes moved in the underbrush, too quick and smooth for animals. From the shadows stepped a figure, thin, hunched, and wrapped in tattered bark and moss. "Who goes there?" Hansel demanded, stepping protectively in front of Gretel. The figure raised a hand, gnarled and bark-like. "I am called the Whisperer," it said, voice like wind through dead leaves. "I am the echo of the forest's curse." Gretel swallowed hard. "Are you friend or foe?" The Whisperer smiled, a cracked, hollow thing. "Neither. I am bound to the forest's will, but I can aid those who seek its undoing." Hansel narrowed his eyes. "Why should we trust you?" The Whisperer's eyes gleamed. "Because I once was like you, lost, trapped, and hungry for freedom. But the forest claimed me, and I became its voice." Gretel tightened her grip on the book. "How do we break the curse?" The Whisperer gestured to the book. "That grimoire holds the key. But to break the forest's hold, you must face what you fear most." Hansel's heart thundered. "And what's that?" The whisperer's smile deepened. "Your own shadows." Suddenly, the ground trembled. From the trees emerged shapes, half-seen figures twisted by fear and dark magic. Hansel and Gretel back toward the glade centre, the whisperer trailing silently behind. The figures closed in, faces blurred, voices whispering secrets of betrayal, guilt, and loss. Hansel recognized the faces, reflections of his own fears and regrets, twisted by the forest's power. Gretel's knees buckled as a shadowy figure took the form of their mother, her eyes hollow and accusing. "Why did you leave us?" the figure hissed. "Why did you let us wander alone?" Gretel fought tears. "We didn't leave. We never wanted to be lost." The shadows swirled, voices rising in a haunting chorus. The whisperer raised a hand, chanting words that seemed to weave light through the darkness. Hansel grasped Gretel's hand. "We have to believe. We have to fight this." The shadows recoiled, shrieking as the light from the grimoire pulsed brighter. With a final cry, the forest's illusion shattered. The glade fell silent once more. Hansel and Gretel stood breathless, but unbroken. The whisperer nodded. "You have passed the first trial, but the forest's curse is deep, and the path ahead darker still." Gretel looked at the book. "Then we keep moving." Hansel nodded. Together, the whisperer dissolved into the mist, like a breath exhaled too long, its final words still echoing in Gretel's ears. "The path only opens for those willing to bleed." She didn't understand what it meant, not yet, but she could feel it lingering, a riddle soaked in something far older than the forest itself. The trees had changed. Their bark seemed darker now, the canopy above so tightly woven with leaves that barely a crack of light filtered through, and beneath their feet the moss pulsed subtly with each step, like the heartbeat of a sleeping beast. Hansel led the way, the book clutched tightly under one arm, his other hand gripping a broken branch he'd sharpened into a makeshift spear. Gretel followed close behind, cradling the lantern. It no longer cast the warm glow from the cottage. It had shifted, become something colder, a flickering blue light, like a soul flame in an old folk tale. "I think we're being followed again," Hansel murmured without turning. "I know," Gretel whispered, "but I think it's different this time. They don't want to attack. They're waiting." "For what?" She didn't answer. She didn't know. The silence was too deep, not the quiet of peace, but of something holding its breath. As they moved through the forest, the underbrush thickened into tangled brambles. Long, thorned vines twisted like serpents across the path. They scraped at their legs, tore at their sleeves. "We need to find a way around," Hansel said, tugging at one of the vines. Gretel looked up. The briars stretched as far as the eye could see, coiled high into the trees and blocking every direction but forward. "No," she said. "This is the test." Hansel turned toward her, confused. "Test? The whisperer said we had to bleed. I think this is it." You think it wants us to cut ourselves on purpose? No, she said, shaking her head. Not like a ritual. I think it wants us to suffer, to push through pain. It's not just thorns. It's a barrier of will. Hansel looked down at the thorns again. They were cruel, thick, some nearly the size of his thumb, glinting with a strange resin that oozed from the tips like venom. Still, he nodded. All right. He held out his hand to Gretel. Together, she took it. The briars did not shift or yield. As they stepped in, the first thorns sliced into their clothing, their skin. Hansel grunted through clenched teeth. Gretel winced as a thorn snagged her cheek, drawing a thin line of blood down to her jaw. The lantern flickered. For a moment, the blue flame sputtered, then grew brighter, as though feeding on their pain. The vines whispered against them, but there were no words, only sounds, rustling memories, distant sobs, the faint laughter of a woman Gretel almost remembered. By the time they stumbled through the other side, their clothes were shredded, skin marked by dozens of cuts, some shallow, others deeper. Hansel collapsed to his knees. God! Gretel dropped beside him, breathing heavily. It's like it was alive, watching, enjoying it. The trees here were quieter. The suffocating pressure they'd felt in the briars had lifted. Still, the forest remained dim and endless. As they sat, Gretel pulled the grimoire from Hansel's pack and opened it to the next glowing page. The ink pulsed gently, forming new words as though reacting to the blood, now drying on her fingers. Pain is the currency of memory. Give what was taken and receive what was lost. Gretel frowned. What does that mean? Hansel sat upright, staring at the page. What if the forest took something from us, and we have to remember what it was? Gretel's mind raced. Images flickered at the edge of her thoughts. A warm hand brushing her hair. A lullaby sung in a language she no longer spoke. The smell of firewood and something baking. Do you remember Mother's face? She asked. Hansel blinked. No, not clearly. Just her voice, sometimes. That's what it took, she whispered. Our memories. That's why we've been drifting through this place like ghosts. We've forgotten who we are. The grimoire pulsed again. Speak her name. Gretel's breath hitched. I don't know it. Neither did Hansel. They sat in stunned silence, the blue lantern flickering weakly. Somewhere behind them, the briar thicket shuddered, as though mocking their ignorance. Hansel slammed a fist into the dirt. We were kids. How could we know? It's not fair. Wait, Gretel said. What about the music box? From the nursery, the one that played the song. She began to hum it softly. Hansel joined in, their voices trembling, as the lullaby rose into the stillness. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the grimoire glowed fiercely. The ink bled across the page, forming a name. Anneliese. Gretel whispered it aloud. Anneliese. The forest stirred. Light flared around them. Not from the lantern, but from the trees themselves. Glowing blossoms unfurled along the branches, filling the air with their pale shimmer. The pain in their cuts lessened. A warm breeze swept through the clearing. Hansel clutched his chest. "I remember her," he said softly. "Her hands were always cold, but she hugged us like she was trying to keep us alive." Tears welled in Gretel's eyes. She used to sing that lullaby when the world felt like it was falling apart. The forest pulsed with quiet understanding, like it too remembered. The grimoire opened a new page. The witch walks in memory's skin. She wears your sorrow. She drinks your loss. Find her and take her name from her. Hansel exhaled. So she's not just a thing out there in the woods. She's inside our grief, and probably inside someone we trusted, Gretel said. Someone who looked kind, familiar. They rose slowly, limbs sore, clothing bloodied, but minds sharper than before. The forest no longer felt like a stranger. It felt like a wound. Gretel closed the book and handed it to Hansel. "Let's keep going," as they stepped onto the narrow trail beyond the briars. The wind shifted again, carrying a smell both sweet and sickening, like warm sugar and rot. A house was ahead. Faint lights flickered behind its windows. "Do you think it's hers?" Hansel asked. Gretel nodded. "We're close now. I can feel it." They approached in silence. The house looked wrong, like it had grown from the earth rather than being built. Its walls were curved like bones. Its chimney slanted like a broken neck. The light inside flickered red, and the door opened before they could knock. Inside was the scent of gingerbread and something far older, and from the shadows within came a voice, lilting and cold. "Children, you've come home." The door swung open before them, creaking like an ancient hinge on a coffin lid. Inside, the house glowed with a warm amber light, flickering like candle flames, held too close to dying breath. The scent of sugar and molasses curled through the air, sickly sweet, clinging to their lungs with every inhale. The floorboards were thick, uneven, wooden slabs marbled with black streaks, as though the very grain had once been charred and grown back wrong. The walls were crooked, decorated with curling tendrils of ivy that had withered to a deep, blood red hue. Hansel hesitated at the threshold, spear in hand. "We shouldn't go in." Gretel's hand trembled on the lantern handle, but she stepped forward. "We have to. This is where it ends." The moment they crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind them, sealing with a dull finality. The air shifted, heavier now, closer, as though the house had inhaled their presence. "Come in, my little birds," the voice purred again, from somewhere deeper inside. "So far you've come, so much you've bled. I've been waiting." They followed the sound, deeper into the house. The corridor twisted like intestines, and the walls grew tighter as they went. The glow dimmer. Doors lined the hallway, some ajar, others closed tightly. From within one, they heard humming, faint, tuneless. from another soft scratching, as if fingernails were carving words into wood. One door they passed was smeared with something dark and crusted, like old jam or dried blood. They didn't open any. At the corridor's end stood a kitchen, too wide for the house's size. The ceiling arched unnaturally high, rafters webbed with stringy moss and faded ribbons. The hearth burned with green fire, and in front of it stood the witch. She looked nothing like they had imagined, and everything they feared. Her dress was made of sewn-together curtains and children's aprons, stained with syrup and wine. Her hair was long and thin, like unravelling rope, crawling down her back in matted coils. Her face was soft, too soft, the kind of softness that comes from swelling, from rotting beneath the skin. Her smile was wide, too wide, but her eyes were human. "I remember you," Gretel whispered. "You were the woman who helped us when we were small. You gave us bread after Mother died." The witch curtsied mockingly. "I gave you warmth, shelter, sweetness, and in return you forgot me." Hansel raised the spear. "We didn't forget. You made us forget." She clicked her tongue. No, sweet boy. The forest did that. I merely offered a place to rest in exchange for offerings." The fire behind her crackled. Its light did not warm the room. It warped it. Gretel stepped forward. "You wore her skin. Anneliese, you took her voice." "She gave it to me," the witch said, tilting her head. "Willingly. Mothers often do." A silence fell. Then Gretel said, "We want her back." The witch's smile widened to the edges of her cheeks, stretching skin. "Oh, children, you are so late, but so brave. Still, nothing is free." She raised a hand, and the walls began to move. From the floorboards, from the shadows, from the gaps between the crooked cabinets, they came. Children, some no older than 5, some nearly grown, all pale, hollow-eyed, their skin tinted by candlelight, lips red as blood and raw sugar. They emerged silently, barefoot, their fingers curled like claws. Their mouths never opened, but their eyes stared hungrily. "These are the others," the witch said. "The ones who came for promises, who stayed for sweets, who left as part of the house." Hansel and Gretel backed into each other, forming a tight circle in the middle of the warped kitchen. The witch stepped forward. "Give me your pain, and I'll return your memories. Give me your grief, and I'll open the way home." Gretel's voice trembled. "That's not what you want." The witch paused. "What I want," she said slowly, "is for the house to keep growing, for the walls to remember, for the forest to sing again." "Sing what?" Hansel snapped. "The lullaby of forgetting," the witch whispered. "The one that rocks the lost into quiet, the one that silences names." Gretel clutched the lantern and raised it. The flame inside flared white. The witch hissed, "That light does not belong here." Gretel's voice rose. "It belongs to us. So did our mother's name, so did our pain. You took all of it and made it yours. The children creatures closed in, feet silent on the boards. Hansel raised the spear, then Gretel reached into her coat and pulled out the grimoire. It opened on its own, the pages fluttering like a bird in panic. Then they stilled, open to a blank page. Words bled from the paper, written in pulsing red. Burn what cannot be unmade. Hansel and Gretel looked at each other. Then they looked at the hearth. Gretel stepped forward and hurled the lantern into the green fire. It exploded in light. The flame roared, swallowing the hearth, the ceiling, the air. The heat was blinding, yet it didn't burn them. Instead, it turned inward, toward the witch. She screamed, not a cry of fear, but rage. Her body fractured, like sugar glass underfoot. From her mouth poured black smoke and the sound of children crying. The pale children in the kitchen began to vanish, one by one, fading like steam. The house wailed, its walls cracked, the ceiling split, vines twisted in agony. Hansel grabbed Gretel's arm. Run! They fled back through the hallway, dodging falling beams and shattering glass. Behind them, the fire consumed everything, not red, but white hot, devouring darkness. They reached the door, and it opened before them, not as a trap, but a release. They burst out into the forest. But the forest was changing too. Trees blackened and fell inward. The moss turned to ash beneath their feet. The sky burned above with eerie twilight, as though the world was resetting itself. At the edge of the clearing, a figure waited. She was slender, worn, her face framed by silvering hair. Her eyes were deep pools of sorrow and strength. "Anneliese," Gretel whispered. The woman nodded. "My brave ones." They ran to her. She embraced them both, pressing their foreheads to hers. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I couldn't stop her. I only tried to shield you from what came after." Hansel shook his head. "You didn't fail. We remember now." Anneliese looked back toward the burning house. "The forest will sleep again," she said, "but it will dream." "What happens to us?" Gretel asked. "You walk forward," Anneliese said, "but never forget." She kissed their cheeks, once each. Then she vanished into mist. Behind them, the fire devoured the last of the crooked house, its scream reduced to an ember's sigh. The forest stilled, and at last the path opened. The forest was quiet again, not the same suffocating silence it wore like a mask before, but a softer stillness, like the hush that follows an old lullaby, lingering on a child's breath. Hansel and Gretel stood at the edge of the clearing. The scorched remains of the witch's house behind them, nothing but charred vines and ash fading into the dirt. The path forward had returned, but it looked different than before. No longer overgrown and twisting, now it stretched straight ahead, framed by weeping trees and pale wildflowers that hadn't bloomed in seasons. Their petals shimmered faintly, dew clinging to their edges like tiny tears. Gretel took the first step. Hansel followed. They walked without speaking for a long while. The air grew cooler as the canopy thinned, and moonlight slipped between the leaves, dappling the trail in silver and blue. The witch's fire still clung to their skin, not burning, but humming beneath the surface, a quiet reminder. Eventually, Hansel broke the silence. "Do you think she's really gone?" "The witch?" Gretel asked. He nodded. Gretel looked down at her hands. The grimoire had vanished when the fire swallowed the house. The lantern too. All they had now was each other. "I think she left pieces behind," she said, "like roots too deep to pull." Hansel said nothing for a while. Then, "And Anneliese?" "She gave us what she could," Gretel whispered. "Maybe that's all any mother can do." The wind stirred the trees. Somewhere far off, an owl hooted, soft and sad. They walked on. The path grew brighter as dawn approached. In the east, the sky bled pink into violet, and the stars blinked away like secrets buried too long. Finally, the trees parted. They stepped into the world beyond the forest. At first, it felt wrong, too open, too quiet. Fields stretched wide, dotted with stones and dry grass. A fence lay broken, half swallowed by vines. Beyond it, a dirt road curved between hills, leading to a village they hadn't seen in years. It looked smaller than they remembered, and older. A bell rang in the distance, faint and hollow. Hansel turned to Gretel. "Do you think they'll remember us?" She met his eyes. "I think it doesn't matter." Together, they crossed the fence. As they walked, a shape appeared ahead, stooped and hunched. An old man with a crooked back and a cane, leading a goat along the road. He squinted at them as they approached, then blinked. "God's breath," he muttered. You can't be." Hansel stepped forward. "Do you know who we are?" The man stared. His eyes widened. "You're them," he whispered. "The woodcutter's children, Hansel and Gretel. But you were lost years ago. They said wolves took you." "No," Gretel said softly. "The forest did." The old man's hands shook. "Your father," he waited until he couldn't anymore. He buried empty coffins. Hansel's throat tightened. "He's gone." The man nodded. "Long time now. Poor soul." Gretel closed her eyes. "And our mother?" But the man only looked away. "No one speaks her name." They walked past him toward the village. As they entered, the houses blinked awake, shutters creaking open, doors cracking to let curious eyes peek out. Whispers stirred, faces emerged, aging, familiar, uncertain. Some recognized them, others pretended they didn't, but none stopped them. They found their old home near the edge of the village. The roof had sagged. Weeds had taken the garden, but the door was still red, the way their father had painted it, so the forest would know not to swallow us. Hansel reached out and touched the wood. It was cold. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old sorrow. Cobwebs draped the rafters. A broken chair lay in the hearth. On the table, a spoon still sat beside an empty bowl, as though waiting for a meal that never came. They didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. Instead, they sat together in the centre of the room as the sun rose. Later that day, a knock came at the door. It was a girl, small, pale, eyes too wide for her face. Her dress was torn. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely louder than the wind. "I was lost," she said. Hansel and Gretel looked at each other. Then Gretel knelt and took the girl's hand. "You're not anymore. The forest," they knew, would never sleep forever. Its hunger was patient. Its paths shifted again and again. But now they were its keepers, not to feed it, but to guide those who returned, and maybe, in time, to teach the forest a new name, one that would not forget.